Welcome to the Middleware Tech YouTube channel. In this series, you'll learn about default method inside interface. All code examples used in the videos will be available on GitHub. Let's get started.
Just see here. Next topic is default and the static method. Okay, that is our topic now. So before coming into this topic, let me first tell you the signature of the functional interface, how it look like. We can create a functional interface like public interface. Assume interface name is fi. Opening brace and closing brace. This is the functional interface. Now inside this functional interface, we have one function called @functional interface. This is the annotation that I have declared on the top of the interface. Now I'm saying that it's a functional interface. So functional interface means what? I should have a single public and abstract method. Yes, I have a public and abstract method. Void display. I have a single public and abstract method. Fine. Now from Java 8, it is saying that in your functional interface, okay, or in your interface, you can have method also in Java 8. From Java 8, it is saying that you can have a method inside the interface. Two types of method you can write. One is called default method. How it look like? Default void show. This is one method. Now see here, method with declaration. So from Java 8, it is saying that from Java 8, you can create a method inside the functional interface. So that default method you can define inside a functional interface. Not only that, you can define a static method also. You can define a static method also. So just write the static method as you write, right? Public, then static, void, and some name. So from Java 8, we can define these two types of method inside my interface. Now the questions will come into picture, like what is the advantage of writing these two types of method? Why I write? What is the need? You know, what is the need that will tell us that yes, you should put a default method inside interface? Or if I'm going to put a static method inside an interface from Java 8, then what is the need? Why I need to implement a static method, right? So those things we have to explore, right? So let's see. Okay. So let's talk about first default method. Let's talk about first about default method. default method. Let's say some point. Now see, this default method, first of all, I want to say that what does it mean by default? What is the meaning of default? Question is it an access specifier? Then I can say that no, it is not access specifier. See, default access specifier in Java means nothing. If you're not using anything before a class name, method name, and variable name, then I can say that this class, method, or variable have default access. So default means nothing. Default access specifier means nothing. You don't have to add any access specifier before a class name, method name, or variable name. That is the meaning of default access specifier in Java. Now the question is that we're talking about default method, right? So if you see, the name is default. Correct. So can I write like this in our code? Can I write like this? Let me check. I'll come static after some time. Let me just complete the default first. I have a function interface and I have written an abstract method and default method. Let me check, is there any error or not? Let me put a class name as default demo.java, something like that, or default test.java. So right click new class, my class name as, I'm going to write default test. Okay, and this is your public method. Okay, and you can just save like this, default test. Control, you can put this interface here itself, Control V. So this is my functional interface in Java 8. And inside this interface, I have public and abstract methods. Save it. Right click, source, format. Yes, it's correct. No error. So that means what? We can have a default method inside an interface. Okay. So now the question is that why the need came, that we have to put a default method inside an interface. What is the need? Based on some requirement, always say things gets created, right? See, this default method will save us a lot. Lots of focus we can include for default method, because when we create an interface, then it is final, right? That means that we cannot change that interface. As I told you, that assume you are creating a particular project. In your project, you have some inheritance hierarchy. So in that inheritance hierarchy, always top level interface, top level in the class and the inheritance hierarchy always declared as an interface, right? Now when you created that interface, assume in your inheritance hierarchy, you have some project, and in that project, the top level interface name is account. Derive class from the account is an interface. So derived class and account is savings account. I have current account. Okay. Now, savings account or current account, these are the two derived class account. Savings account and current account, these are two derived class of account. Fine. Now what I want to say is that in the inheritance hierarchy, always the top level class is always defined as an interface or abstract class. So in this example, if I create count as an interface, so what are the properties of interface is that if you create a variable in the interface, then that will be by default available in the derived class, but you cannot change that variable because interface variable are public static final. If you have some methods, three methods you declare inside an account, then all the derived class must have to override all the three methods. You need or don't need, you have to override, because this is the property of the interface. Now, like this way, you can have lots of inheritance hierarchy in your project. Let's see, from here also, you'll find in your project I'm talking about, in the inheritance hierarchy, assume you have one class, then another one class. I'm just writing it like this, C, D, E. And in the inheritance hierarchy, from here also, you'll find some other classes like F, G, H, J. Like this way, you can define multiple inheritance hierarchy of classes. Assume K is a class, L is a class, assume for the time being. What I'm saying is that assume the complete project is done based on this inheritance hierarchy. Yes, it is done. Now what I want is that now you got some client requirement, that the client, based on the client requirement, you have to put a particular functionality in all the classes in F, G, H, I, J, K, L. That based on that client requirement, that particular functionality should be available in all the classes. How we can do it? Already interface is created. You cannot change the interface. If you change this interface, if you add some functionality in this interface, automatically you have to change all the derived classes under these interfaces. That's why we are saying that. When you create an interface, then we are not allowed to change. That is the problem. If I create an interface, after that if I'm going to change based on some client requirement, you cannot change this interface because lots of derived classes are dependent on this. Right? So let me write here one point. Is that if we create an interface, then we are not allowed to change. We are not allowed to change the interface. Okay, so that is the problem. In future, if I have to implement some specific functionality, then what I have to do? If I'm changed somehow, then I have to change all the derived class under this. That's the problem. Tomorrow, if I want to add some function, then how I'm going to add that particular function is specific requirement. So that is the point. Question is that without affecting the implementation class, is it possible to add some function in the interface? Or the question is, without affecting without affecting the implementation classes. That affecting the implementation classes, is it possible to add some function? Add some function? That is the question. Yes, we can do that one. That we can do with the help of default method. We can directly create a default method inside an interface, and using inside this default method, you can add some functionality directly inside an interface. Okay, we can add some code directly inside an interface, inside a default method. So if I add like this, let's see here. Let's see, this is an function interface, right? And assume this class is going to implement, let's see here, implements function interface. Yes, fine. And we have a default method here. Yes, so just write something here. System dot out dot println, and you're going to print something here, like you can say like this is default method, right? This is default method. So this statement we have given inside this default method. Fine, no issues. Now the question is that my class implements this function interface. It is giving some error. Why? Because I have not overridden this abstract method called display. So I should, according to the properties of interface, any class implements an interface must have to override all the abstract method declared in the interface. So I have to override this one using public void display. So this we have overridden. Now see here what I want to say. Interface property is saying that till Java 7, interface property is saying that any class that you declared, any class that implements an interface must have to override all the abstract method declared inside an interface. Yes, we have done that one also. We have done that one. Correct. We have done that one. Fine. Now the question is that I have default method also. Now see, I have not overridden default method inside an interface. There is no error. Again, I'm saying, see from Java 8, what are the changes? Java 8 interface is saying that that if you have default method inside an interface, it is not mandatory that the implementation class have to override your default method. Why I've written default method in the inside interface? Some of the functionality I want to add directly inside an interface. I don't want that function should be available to any derived classes. It will be available only inside this interface. Then default method is there. Remember that default method implementation classes does not require to override a default method. It is optional. If you want, you can override. If you don't want, you don't have to override. So to remember that default method or our implementation classes should not worry about the default method because implementation classes does not require to override the default method. Yes, so that is another one property. What we got is that implementation classes, so solution is default method. So we got another one point about default method. What is this? Implementation classes need not required to override. Implementation classes need not require to override a default method. It is not mandatory. Other public abstract method is mandatory. For a default method is not mandatory. Right? So this is another one property you got from here about default method. Fine. Now the question is that why the name they have put default method? Is it has some similarity with default access specifier? No. As I already told you that default access specifier is different thing, default method is different thing. Because default access specifier means nothing. If you don't have any access specifier for a particular class, for a particular method, for a particular variable, then I say it's a default access specifier. But default method, you can see here why this default method name came. The meaning is that default method means default implementation. The method that already have default implementation. That is the meaning of default method. So let me write another one point. Default method means, why this name came like that, right? Default method means method have default implementation. Default method means the method should have default implementation. Fine. Okay. So so that then how I can call a default method? If I have this default method here and assume I want to call this default method from this main method, how I'll call it? Can I call it or not, or how it is? I have a default method inside an interface. Correct. So can I call this default method from here to my class? Assume I want to override. Assume. Control C. I want to override here with my own code. See, it's giving some error. What is the error? It is saying that accessibility to public. Yes. So the point is that if remember that when you're writing a default method that you can write only inside an interface, you cannot write a default method inside a class. You can override a default method with your own code. It is fine. You can override using public with your own code. That is, this is a default method override and overridden. That you can do, but you have to remember that default method only you can write inside interface. You cannot write a default method inside a class, right? We got another one property, that is method default method we can write only inside interface. That's it. You can only declare inside an interface. You cannot declare inside a class. If you want, okay, I want to write a default method inside a class, then spelling mistake. DEFAULT, default method. If you want that, oh no, I want to write a default method inside a class, then it will give an error. It cannot sense, your class cannot sense a default method. So you can just write public. That's it. And that's it, done. Right? So this is the properties that you have to remember, that the purpose of this default method is nothing but some of the functionality I cannot change in the derived class, because if I want to write that functionality inside an interface, I am not allowed to write a method with definition inside interface. Not only that, if I write some method with definition inside an interface, then all the derived classes must have to override the method that is declared inside interface, right? Right? So for that problem is resolved with the help of default method. Using this default method implementation, I can write some specific functionality using default implementation so that I can use that functionality in any one of the derived classes also. I override or not override, I can use it because you're using inheritance, right? Fine. So so this is all about default method in Java 8. Any questions from default method from anyone?
Yeah. So this interface F1 is just an interface, but it is not at the functional interface, correct? Because it is having two methods.
No. What is the meaning of function interface? Function interface is
It should have only one method inside that.
one abstract method.
One abstract.
Function
There
interface
can
means
be a
abstract method. There can be multiple default method. Just see here. I can write some other default method. Control C, Control V. This is another one default method. Let's see. This is another one default method. One. We can have multiple.
Okay.
But functional interface would have only one abstract method. You can have multiple default method.
Okay.
Right? Okay. Any other question about default from anyone?
Can we
Yes,
add that method overloading type of code in that interface? Suppose for the show, okay, for default void show, I'm just passing in first instance I'm not passing any argument. Okay, so for same method, if I override for the two argument, then that can be possible.
You are going to say you are going to take some parameter here.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to int a. I'm going to take one parameter, and here I'm going to take parameter int x comma int y, like that. Yes.
No. For the
he's asking overloading instead of so one.
Overloading. Sorry, not overriding. It's overloading. The same
Okay.
method show with the two arguments.
Okay, you are saying method overloading. Okay.
Overloading.
Fine.
Sorry, not overriding.
Interesting questions. Yes, interesting questions. We can have no error, right? So till the time you know have, that means it is supporting. So that is the point, right? Okay. Anyone, any other questions on default only? Default method in Java 8 from anyone? Any question?
Amit, one question that is not related to the default, but in functional interface there is only one abstract method, right?
There is a functional interface. We can have only one abstract.
Only
method.
one
Yes,
abstract.
correct. But it can have it can have any number of default method and static method also. That I have not done that time, right?
Okay.
And why we have not written here annotation of the @ functional interface?
Yes,
It is obviously not must.
That is not mandatory. It is optional.
Yeah,
if you want, you can use it.
Optional. Okay,
That
we can use here as well.
We can use it. You can hear or also you can use it. Already I told, right? It is a property that use of
And
functional interface is.
what is the difference in between a default method in interface and non-static method in abstract class? So is this recommended to use in this scenario abstract class? How
No,
it is
no, just
differentiated?
okay.
Yeah,
First,
just I tried to try to
okay.
understand the difference in between default method in interface and
Or
non-static
other method,
method in
non-static
abstract
method.
class.
Fine, I got here. Abstract class or interface?
Yeah, abstract class. Abstract class non-static method is there, right? And before Java 8, we have the difference in between them that we cannot put here non-static method. We could not have
I
method
got
having body.
okay,
Yeah,
I
that
got
is
it.
the I would like to understand that.
Okay, so ABS abstract. Assume this is my abstract class, and this abstract public abstract AA abstract class A. This is my abstract class, as you can see, it's Java 8. Now inside an abstract class, I can have a method declaration and method definition both. So I'm going to write void void calculate. This is a method with declaration. So as you know that method with declaration, by default it will be abstract. This should be abstract inside an abstract class. An abstract class can have a method with definition also. So I can write void show. This is a method with definition in abstract class that I can print something like system.out.println, and inside this I'm going to write something. This is abstract class method something. So the question is that what is the difference between this function and this function, correct?
Yes.
Yes. Now see here, it is very easy, right? Now here in the abstract class, we have a method without method with definition. So method with definition is not by default abstract. And any class will, if any class extend this abstract class, then it have to override this abstract method, but it is not mandatory that you have to override this method in case of abstract class implementation. The first difference is that this method is not coming with any default keyword, whereas your Java 8 default method is coming with a default keyword. That is the first difference from the signature point of view.
Yeah, signature point of view and syntax point of view, I understood. But in application, while we are writing, developing code, there in that case, actually, we are confusing whether I should go for interface and abstract class. This is the scenario. Syntactically, yeah.
I got your point. Now you have to think about the scenario is different. Both the scenario is different. Now, both abstract class and interface, we have to know that when I should go for abstract class implementation and when I should go for interface implementation. That is the first point. First point, so scenario is that when you go with a particular project, so as you know that abstract class does not support multiple inheritance, whereas interface support the concept of multiple inheritance. So when you create any particular project, or we are going to work on some multiple modules inside a particular project. So if you find that already 80% project is done by other team, if you find that and 20% project you have to implement, in that case you can go for abstract class implementation. That is the scenario when I should go for abstract class implementation. And
that
assume you are going.
that part is
I'm
okay,
going to.
but yeah, that part is okay. But my question is like this is the void show method and their default method is there. Like if we are talking about implementation class, whether it extends to abstract class or whether it implements interface, we could have a different implementation. Accordingly, we can override the things, so we can get that implementation. If we go for abstract class, create an implementation and provide different implementation for that method. If you go for interface, then you provide different implementation or override that method, so that you can have a unique implementation there. So in that scenario, actually, I'm trying to understand. I got your point that syntactically difference is there, and if you have common feature, then you go for abstract class. If you have kind of difference in it, you go for interface. But I'm pinpointing these two things, like this default method and that void show having somebody. If we'll think about implementations, if we'll think about implementation, whether that implementation, if it provides a body of different implementation, then it can execute.
Yeah,
We can have different implementation.
I got your point. So the point is that we have to talk first. We have to talk about why this default concept came in the interface.
Yeah.
Why this default method concept came? It came
that can be achievable by abstract class.
No. Why this default concept came? What is the need that I have to write a default method inside an interface? What is the need behind this? The need is that if I have an inheritance hierarchy based on interface, then I cannot change the top level interface. Why? Because if I'm going to change the top level interface, then I have to change all the derived method that comes under that, all the derived classes method that comes under that interface. So that was the need. Based on that need, if I'm going to add some specific functionality inside interface, then how I can achieve that one? The solution is I can achieve that purpose writing a default method with default implementation inside an interface. That is the need. That's why I need default method inside interface. So this is one separate scenario. Whereas the method that we are talking about in abstract class, that is completely different thing. That is the properties of abstract class. And this is the properties of the default method. So if you go into the point that why I need this default method, then it will be clear. Right?
When and how default method would be executed?
When and how this default method will be executed. Fine. Now in this example, I have this default method. So in this default method, I have, if you see in this default method, this is my interface and this is my interface. And inside this interface, I have this default method. Fine, I assume I have only this default method. One abstract class and one default method. Now this is my derived class. In the derived class, I have overridden this display method. It is not required to override this one. And the question is that how I can call this default method? How I can call this default method, right? So just right here, let me check interface name. My interface name is F1 dot, what is the default method? Show. So just see if I call F1 dot show, is it coming? What it is saying? It is saying that if one dot, okay, it is taking some argument. Just assume you are taking some argument 10. Save it here. This is an interface name. Just see here, please. This is an interface name. This is a default name method. How I can call the default method using interface name. Can I do it like this? We can't. Why? Because it is not a static method. So the solution is that default method is already there inside the interface. Yes, I have not overridden here. If you want, you can override. Now, how I can call this default method? Just create an object of this class. Control V, obj equal to new, Control V. Then you can call obj dot whatever parameter, though I am not using that one. So this you can call, right? Since it is implementing, right? So automatically will be available. You can call, right click on a Java application, or you can call overriding this method also here as you wish.
But this way, I think we need to modify the classes, all the classes, as you said in your scenario, there are already 8 or 10 classes already implemented. So we need to change all those classes.
No. If you have written default method not required to override in the derived classes. Its overridden is optional. Default method overridden is optional. It is not mandatory that I have to override a default method in the implementation classes. It is not mandatory.
The scenario what I have understood is that the project is completed, the coding is done. Now the client comes up with that with some additional requirements. So that was the functional requirement of this default method.
Yeah.
So
yes.
but you have written the default method, but in order to execute or implement this, I think there should be a centralized way of execution without modifying individual classes.
You're not modifying, right?
Yeah,
I'm
at
not
least
modifying it.
You are at least
I'm
invoking.
Just creating an object you have to invoke. So how we are going to invoke this default method? You have to create an object you have to access, right? Otherwise, it is not a static that you're going to call it using class name. It's a method only inside a class.
Yeah, so we need to modify all the classes, right?
Not modifying, you're going to access that functionality getting an object of the class. Now, if you need to override it based on your class requirement, you can override it based on your class requirement. In your code, you can override based on your class requirement, and so it should be public, right? Public. So then you can overridden method, whatever you're going to print, that overridden one, it will print if you did. So that is up to you. If you don't want to override, it will call this. If you want to override, whatever you're going to write, that it will call. So that is the thing. So just it is giving a place, independent place for your implementation method. How you are going to consume, how you are going to invoke it, it's up to you based on the application requirement.
And here in main method, we have made the object of default test, and we can also use Lambda expression also to call the show.
You can also use
Lambda
regular expression. Yes,
Lambda
you can
expression.
also use lambda expression. Yes, you can also use lambda expression.